Today we will be talking about Plato's Euthyphro, which gives incredible insight into how Socrates used rhetoric and how it involved his trial. While Euthyphro was written by Plato, it's actually a dialogue about Socrates and Euthyphro. It takes place right before Socrates' trial, where Meletus has accused Socrates of being impious.
The dialogue starts with Socrates and Euthyphro running into each other at court. We learn that Socrates is on trial for being impious and corrupting the youth, and Euthyphro is accusing his father of inadvertently killing a murderous migrant worker. Socrates is shocked that Euthyphro is accusing his own father, but Euthyphro says it is the right and holy thing to do.
Hey, Socrates.
Hey man, how's it going?
Not so good. My dad killed a guy, so now I have to prosecute him.
Man, that really sucks, but why'd you do that to your dad though? Like, the accuser must have been family too, right?
Nah, I didn't even know the guy. But, he killed someone, so I got him.
Socrates then decides that if Euthyphro can teach him what a pious action is, he can use this as defense in his trial, since he is being specifically charged for being impious. Euthyphro agrees to teach him. Then Socrates asks exactly what it is to be pious, to which Euthyphro replies, "I say that the holy is doing what I am now doing, prosecuting a wrongdoer whether it involves murder, or the theft of sacred objects, or committing any other crime of a similar kind, whether they happen to be my father or mother, or anyone else whosoever, and, on the other hand, not to prosecute is unholy." This, however, was not exactly the answer Socrates was looking for.
Anyways, how are you doing?
Not great. This Meletus guy is trying to fight me for corrupting the youth and being impious or whatever.
Oh, that's lame.
Yeah, I know. So, you're the expert on it, right? So, can you tell me, what is the one thing that makes all pious things pious?
Well, I'm pious because I prosecute anyone who does a crime, even if it's my lame dad.
What?
Well, that's what the gods want me to do, like Zeus did to his dad.
Socrates then replies that Euthyphro has only given him one example, not the definition of piety. Then he says that Euthyphro has claimed that, quote, "things that are unholy by virtue of a single characteristic, and things that are holy by virtue of a single characteristic." Euthyphro agrees, and Socrates asks what that characteristic is. He replies that what the gods love is holy, and what they don't isn't holy.
Socrates is still unsure if the claim that Euthyphro has made is true, but he does want to explore it further. He does this by asking that if the gods fight over it, then is it holy or unholy? Since it cannot be both at the same time, then the argument itself is invalid. Euthyphro tries to correct it to what all of the gods love, or what all of the gods hate, making it holy or unholy, but Socrates is still unsatisfied.
Okay, but do you really believe everything they say about the gods?
Yeah.
Well, but there are like 3 million. How do you know that they don't disagree? Does that mean something can be holy and unholy at the same time?
So something that they all love is pious. When there's something that they all hate, like murder, that would be impious.
But then they would have to agree that a specific murder was unjust, too.
Well, sometimes they just all agree, you know?
Socrates then asks, is the holy loved by the gods because it is holy, or is it holy because it is loved by the gods? Socrates compares loving and being love, and then they decide that, quote, "it's not because it's in a state of being loved that something is loved by those who love it, but it's in a state of being loved because it's loved." So, are holy things approved by the gods because they're holy, or are they holy because they're approved by the gods?
That's a deep question. I guess they approve because it's holy?
To add on to the previous statement, Socrates poses the concept that all the gods love something because it is holy, not that something is holy because the gods love it. Euthyphro agrees. Socrates then speaks for a while about the difference between holy and God-loved. but realizes he still hasn't gotten a straight answer from Euthyphro. Euthyphro defensively says he could give one if Socrates wasn't making the argument so circuitous, which Socrates takes slight offense to.
So then pious things and things approved by the gods are totally different, right? Can you give me another definition of piety? Because your first one was kind of wrong, to be honest.
Stop tricking me with your rhetoric, man. I know your argument is making mine go around in circles.
Next, Socrates asks if Euthyphro takes piety to be just. He responds that he does, and Socrates asks if everything that is just is pious, or if piety is just a subset of justice. Socrates uses the example of fear and shame.
Just as in these two diagrams, shame is a subset of fear, just as piety would be a subset of justice.
No, man, you did that on your own. It's your answers that are making your argument go in circles.
Whatever.
So, is everything that is pious also just and vice versa? Or is piety only a small part of justice?
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Now that they agree that piety is part of justice, Socrates wants to know which part of justice piety belongs to. Euthyphro decides that, quote, the aspect of the just that is pious and holy is that concerning our attendance on the gods, while our attendance on our fellow human beings is the remaining aspect of the just. Socrates asks for clarification on the definition of attendance, and Euthyphro compares it to horsemanship being attendance on horses. Socrates says that since attendance is for improvement of horses, he asks if our attendance is to improve the gods, and Euthyphro responds that it is definitely not to improve the gods. So, if piety is part of justice, what part is it?
What?
Well, what part of justice applies to holiness?
The parts that are about the gods, not looking after humans.
Cool. But what do you mean by that? By doing holy things, are we helping the gods?
Since Euthyphro claims that it is not the case that we are improving the gods, he instead compares this kind of attendance to slaves attending to their masters. Socrates clarifies this as service to the gods. However, this still isn't right, and they believe it needs more clarification. But Euthyphro seems to be getting more frustrated by every second of the conversation that continues. They come across the point that it is mutual trading. They ask for things from the gods, and the gods receive gratitude, honor, and homage in return. Socrates asks if then it is pleasing, if not beneficial, or loved by the gods. Euthyphro says it is loved by the gods, but Socrates claims that then we have circled back to something being holy because the gods love it, which is the problem from the first part.
Nah, man, it's more like slaves looking after their masters or something.
So why? What is the goal of the gods?
This is a dumb conversation.
How?
Well, we should just worship the gods.
Well, why didn't you just say that? Should we just make sacrifices and pray to the gods? Is that piety?
Well, it's a trade. We get what we need by prayer, and we give them sacrifice in return.
Well, how do sacrifices help the gods?
The gods don't need our help.
So, sacrifices please the gods, but they're not beneficial to them. So, that means the gods don't love sacrifices, right?
They may not be beneficial, but I do think the gods love them.
Well, that just brings us back to where we started. Tell me one more time, what is piety?
I gotta go.
Euthyphro blames Socrates for forcing the conversation to go in circles, and Socrates reverses the blame on him. He asks Euthyphro to define piety one more time, and says he believes that Euthyphro can teach him. Euthyphro instead declares that he has no time to, and leaves.
I think my dad's calling me.
Didn't you put him in jail?
So, what did we learn from this dialogue? One thing we learned was that piety does not have a defined definition, and that it's really more up to the gods and something that we cannot entirely define. However, that doesn't mean that piety doesn't exist as a concept, as it is still something that is incredibly relevant in ancient Greece. However, neither Socrates or Euthyphro has gained any new knowledge, and in fact they lost some in the process about what Euthyphro thought the definition of piety was.
But we do still wonder, why is this dialogue so important? This dialogue specifically is an example of an aporetic dialogue. This is where information is lost instead of gained. However, this theme is entirely in line with that of Socrates' trial, where his acknowledgement that he knows nothing is the greatest wisdom of all. The dialogue is also a prime example of Socrates' specific style of rhetoric, and how he asks questions he knows someone else doesn't know. They answer it too, so he's able to learn more himself. In this case, even by losing knowledge, they gain a greater understanding of what they don't know in the end, which is what makes this dialogue so important and relevant to the trial of Socrates that is about to occur.